This is George Waters, and I am sitting out on the patio in a comfortable chair, looking at the garden that we planted and watching the birds, and looking at the strawberries and the other things that we've put out to grow. At the request of nobody, I decided to get this out and play with it and do a little talking into it. I've had so much fun my entire life living that I thought I might put on tape some of the fun I had. I don't know where to start. My main life has been with my darling wife, 40 years. And with 3 kids that grew up and had grandchildren for us, for them. And we have had nothing but enjoyable times. I guess if I started back as far back as I can remember, I don't remember when our house burned down. All I've got is pictures. About the first thing I remember doing is getting up early in the morning. Seems as though I always like to get up early in the morning. And sneak out of the house. I have to unlock the back door and sneak out of the house and go across the street, the vacant lot, and hunt for horny toads. I didn't want the big horny toads. I was looking for little baby horny toads. And I'd take them and pet them and turn them over and rub their tummy and watch them go to sleep. Then start home with them in a jar and start feeling sorry for them and turn them loose. If I got home before the folks woke up, everything was fine. If I didn't, well then, I guess I got scolded a little bit. I don't remember getting scolded. I guess the next thing I remember was reciting poetry down at the Methodist Church. I was up on a ladder, and I don't remember what I was doing up there, but I was something about blackbirds and a pie. And then I helped Mr. Fisher direct singing when I was about 5 years old. I was just waving my hands around, didn't know what I was doing really. I guess one of the things I remember when I was that age was going down to my grandmother's house all the time and sitting around and listening to her talk, playing the old Victrola that we had to wind up. And one day my brother and I decided to go over to the courthouse, and we had some brand new little Navy suits on. He was taller than me. Well, I'm back. Travis came out and wanted me to read him about the stars, so I've been reading about the stars to Travis, Becky's oldest boy. I think I was telling you about the time my brother and I went over to the courthouse to my grandmother's house. She lived at 1117 Chaparral Street. They built the house. They've been there a long time. My brother and I were in our brand new little sailor suits, and we wandered off over to the courthouse. It was about a half a block away, and there weren't too many cars then. This was in 1928, 29, 30, somewhere in there. They have a big fish pond over at the courthouse. It's kind of a rectangular shape. A lot of fish in it. And we, like boys, were walking around it, and my brother decided to get up on the edge of it, which is about a foot off the pavement, off the sidewalk. And he started walking around it. Well, after one time around it, that got a little boring for him, I guess. And so he started walking a little faster, and of course I followed him and walked a little faster, and then he started jumping the corners. Well, I thought I could jump the corners. And I tried to jump the corners, and I fell right in the middle of it. So they had to get me out with all the goldfish. And when my mother came back to get me, well, all my little clothes were hanging out on the line out there, and I was drying off inside. I don't remember getting a spanking for that. I guess You don't remember bad things like that, but I don't think I got a spanking for it. Well, I remember when, I guess the next thing I really remember was first day of school. I was born August the 14th, 1925, so I went to school when I was just barely 6 years old. Wade Caruth and I stood out in front of the house, and we each held a big rose, and we had our picture taken. And that started something that we had it taken like that when we graduated from high school, and I think once again when we were home after the war. At any rate, the first thing I did when I was in school, I enjoyed school. I liked school. I had several arguments with the teacher. Seemed like I always knew more than the teachers did. When they first told me that I should use the word shan't in something, I told them I didn't think there was such a word as shan't, and had an argument with the teacher, and she called my mother and took me to Mr. Kuntz's office, and I got a little paddling, and then I got home, and whenever I got a paddling at school, I always got one a little bit worse when I got home. My mother meant for me to obey the rules and regulations, and I came to appreciate that later on, but at that particular time I didn't appreciate it a whole lot. Mr. Studer and Mr. Forrester were my teachers, and I was always talking in class. And Mr. Studer took me out one day and said that since I always wanted to yell and talk in class, that he was going to let me yell. And he took me out to the corner of the school ground. It was Edward Furman there in Corpus. And he told me to start yelling. Well, that's a little different, when you're doing it yourself and somebody's telling you to. So I yelled a little bit. He pulled the paddle out, and I started yelling loud. And I yelled loud enough, I guess, because I just got a couple of licks, and he took me back in. It couldn't have been 2 days later. Well, there was a girl that I was chasing outside, and I guess I didn't really know the difference between boy restrooms and girl restrooms. Mainly, I guess, because at that particular time, wanting to go to the bathroom, we always found a corner to get in or a tree to get behind or something, and didn't waste the time to go in the house or inside to a restroom. But at any rate, this girl named Margie Quayle, she did something to me, and I don't know what it was, but I started chasing her, and she ran into the girls' restroom, and I didn't pay much attention. I went in there after her. When I came out, well, Mr. Forrester was standing there, so he was going to make an example of me in front of all the students there in our class, so he sat me down and told me to hold my hand out. He took hold of all the fingers on my hand and bent my hand back, not to where it hurt, but just good and stretched. And he put a little ruler there in my hand, and he told me to close my eyes. I closed my eyes, and he hit me in the hand with that ruler. Now, that hurt. Next time, well, I got braced for that, and he hit me on my leg. And that hurt, too. By the time he got through with me, and Mr. Studer, too, there were two things I didn't do, and that was yell in class, and I stayed out of the girls' restroom. Those were my favorite teachers, I guess, and probably did more for me, along with Mr. Kuntz and Miss Kadanka, who was my first grade teacher, to shape my lives. I remember the things they taught me, because when it came time for vaccination, I guess we fouled up and didn't get my vaccination, and I had to go home. And I bawled like a baby all the way home. I did not want to leave school. I hadn't learned yet that you're not supposed to like to go to school. The rest of the time I was in grade school was fairly uneventful. I mean, I had a lot of fun. Wade Caruth and Lewis Davis and I walked to school every morning, and Wade lived on 16th Street, about 2 blocks behind us, and Lewis lived over across from Vincent Grocery down on Craig until they moved down on Craig and 14th. And we always had 2 or 3 pennies, or we did a little work for Mr. Vincent, and we got some candy. We had a little trouble walking back and forth to school. It seems like it always took us 2 or 3 hours to get home, and folks would get mad and end up having to come down and get us or something. We'd find something to play with on the way home, and it, of course, wasn't girls at that time anyway. But we had some boys that lived on a corner down there named the Feelies, and they were pretty rowdy. They were our age, a little bit older, but they used to shoot BB guns at us and throw rocks at us when we came by. So we used to have to detour around their house, and we didn't always detour one block. We detoured as much as we dared because we had an excuse not to come straight home. And we'd go over on Morgan Street. Now, that was a big street then. And we'd walk down Morgan Street, and there were several places there that we liked to go look in the windows. So it usually took us a while to get home. I'll never forget one afternoon we were playing on the way home, Wake Ruth and I. And there was a thorn bush, one of those hook thorns there. And I fell against it or something, and I cut the end of my finger pretty bad. And it bled like a stuck pig. Well, we went tearing home, and I was ahead of Wade running home to show my mother, because, you know, that you got sympathy for that. It didn't really hurt, but you got some mother's attention and care for that, and that was what I was really after. I guess I still try to do that. And Wade went running up to the door and yelled, screaming at my mother that I'd cut myself and I was bleeding all over myself, and Mother, of course, came tearing out of the door. And like I say, I was ahead of Wade, and I was over on the other side of the door, and they went tearing back down the alley. Now, our alley was almost better than a half a block long. And by the time they got to the end of the alley, well, Mother was looking for me, and I was back on the porch, and things hadn't worked out right, because by the time she got back, the cut wasn't all that bad, and I didn't get the sympathy I wanted. I almost got a spanking for getting into the thorn bush. So sometimes when you're looking for sympathy, it's you better be sure that you deserve it. Oh, well, I guess I better tell you about my piano lessons. My mother wanted me to play the piano. I was musically inclined. I liked to sing, and I liked to direct singing with the song leaders at church when I was probably about the 3rd or 4th grade. So she took me over to this lady's house that was about 3 blocks from the school, from Edward Furman, and paid for some piano lessons. And after about the first 3 weeks of me coming home and not being able to play anything, well, my mother checked with the teacher to see why I hadn't learned anything. And the teacher told her she hadn't seen me yet. Well, I'm sure I got a paddling for that. It might have been with a ruler, or it might have been with something else my mother had, but the main thing that she spanked me with was the hedge out in the front yard. But my piano lessons weren't too red hot. She stopped giving me piano lessons there because I'd either be over playing football, the sand lot, or across the street visiting some kids or something. I never quite made it to the piano lessons. So she took me over to Mrs. Mussey, and she was a very strict piano teacher. And if I didn't show up on time, she'd call my mother. So Mother usually took me over there. And I learned a little bit about piano there, and gave 1 recital or 2 recitals, and played 2 or 3 numbers, and I had all of that I wanted. That was about the end of my piano lessons. Now, let me tell you about the way my mother used to spank me. My mother would get mad at something. I always caused it. I can't ever remember getting a spanking that I claimed innocence, but I was always guilty. I'd always done it. And I knew if I was going to get a spanking, well, I had a spanking coming. But the worst part of getting a spanking was sitting in there when she told me to sit down, and right there, and she was going to spank me, to hear her walking. My mother weighed about 160 pounds, 165. She was a pretty good-sized woman, and she was strong. And I'd hear her go out on the front porch. And she'd go on the front porch, and I'd hear the front porch screen door slam. And I'd hear her break off a twig off that hedge out there, that horrible hedge. Oh, I hated that hedge. I wish we hadn't had it. I love the chinaberry trees out in the front yard, but I did not like that hedge. And she'd take that thing off and start walking back in the house, and I could hear her when she'd take her two fingers, her thumb and her forefinger, and I could hear the as she ripped off all the leaves. And I knew I was fixing to get it. And I want you to know that that thing stung. And when I got that spanking, I remembered it. And I didn't usually do that thing, whatever I had done the second time. I behaved myself. It's right along about this time when the people who lived behind us called Lingos had a good daughter named Jean Lingo. And their daddy raised Pointer pups, bird dogs. And my dad was always liked bird dogs. And Jean's dad gave me a bird dog, which was my first dog. Since Bimbo. And I'll tell you about Bimbo later. Bimbo, I don't remember Bimbo, but Bimbo saved our lives. But I named her Jean after Helen Jean Lingo, and I still kid Helen Jean. She's still in Corpus about naming my dog after her. But Jean and I became very close companions. And Jean started having puppies, and my dad would train those puppies, and we wouldn't sell them, but they were good bird dogs. And my dad did a lot of hunting. He was a good shot, a good hunter. He tried to train me to be a hunter, but I was cross-eyed or something. But at any rate, Jean lived a good long life and had a lot of pups. And after one litter of pups she had, I'll never forget, it's about the second or third year I had her, and I guess I was in the 4th or 5th grade. And this man, he was kind of a bum, came walking across and cut across our vacant lot out in front. We had a big vacant lot out in front of the house where the other house, the house that burned down, was. And we never did rebuild out there. The folks never did. So that's where we always played football and ran around and shinny. Now, I'll tell you about what shinny is after a while. That's where I put my boxing stuff up that I practiced with. I started talking, I remember a whole lot of things. But anyway, Jean was there with her puppies, and this guy went across the front yard, and she took out after him. And she tore his pants leg and broke the skin a little bit. And my dad came running out, and I got Jean back in the fence. And my dad gave the guy some money and told him to buy some new trousers and fixed his leg up, and he left. And that was the end of that. But the next day, my dad had a real good friend in Corpus named Matt Pellegrino. Well, Matt was a deputy sheriff, probably a very good deputy sheriff. And it just so happened that he came to see my dad the next day, and they had been cautioning me and warning me about Jean getting out. And that if she ever got out again, the police would probably come and get her. Well, I wasn't bashful at that age, and I don't guess I was ever afraid of anything. I tried once. So here comes Matt across the front yard I saw the car stop out there, and he came and started walking across the yard with his big pistol hanging on him. And I said, oh boy, he's going to come get my dog. Well, I went tearing out there, and he said, hello, George. And when he did, well, I circled around behind him, and I jerked his pistol out of his holster. And I'll never forget, that was pretty heavy. I didn't realize a pistol was that heavy. But I jerked his pistol out and ran across the lot, that big vacant lot with it. And he started yelling at me and screaming at me. My dad came out, and he started chasing me, and I told him I wasn't going to give the pistol back until he promised not to take my dog. Well, it took them a few minutes to convince me that they didn't come after the dog, that they just came to talk. And I gave him his pistol back. I guess today I've been put in jail for that. But Matt Pellegrino understood, and everything was fine. They got a big laugh out of it. Another time in that same front yard, well, Lewis Davis, I think it was Ira Wade, and I were flying our kites out in the front. And he had this real fancy thing, but Wade was an only child. And sometimes he got some things that I didn't get. I never wanted for anything, though. I always had everything I wanted. But he had this roller that he rolled his string up on. Well, I was using an old stick. And I looked out there and looking around in the junk pile, and I found this iron bar, probably a piece of pipe, I don't know. I didn't know what pipe was then. So I got that, and I rolled my string on that. And we were flying our kites out there. And Wade did something, and I don't know what it was, or I did something. Anyway, I lost my rolled string. My kite pulled it, and it went straight up in the air and hooked on the high line up there. There are electrical lines in front of the house. Did a couple of loops around it, pulled two wires together, and you never heard so much racket in all your life. Those two wires shorted out, and they went flying all over the place and fell to the ground. We ran in and got underneath the bed. It scared us so much. Mother wasn't home. Well, all the CP&L people came out, and they fixed it, and we were peeping out of the windows watching them. They cut it off and fixed it and left. And I don't know whatever happened to that piece of pipe. I never did see that on my kite again. I wouldn't have claimed either one of them if I'd seen it. Well, now let me tell you about some of the things we did on Halloween. I guess most of the things we did were normal. You know, you knew everybody in the neighborhood. Johnny Gallagher lived about 2.5 blocks behind us. And we had heard some of the big boys were going to take some sacks and get some dog doo-doo and put it in the sack and catch the sack on fire and put it up on somebody's front porch and yell, and they'd come out and stomp on it. So Wade and Lewis and I took off that night, and we went out. Of course, we had about 8 or 10 dogs at the time, so we didn't have any trouble finding the doo-doo. We put it in a sack, and we took it to Johnny Gallagher's house. And Johnny was older than us. He was probably graduate, but he was in college, I guess, at the time. And we took it up on the front porch up there and caught it on fire, and then went running back, yelled and screamed, went running back out there and hid. Well, Wade and I went behind a car and on the other side, and I went around the side of the house. But Lewis decided to drop right below the hedge there. You know, that was a good hiding place. But Johnny came out, and he stomped in the fire, and when he did, he said a few choice words. He went back in the house, and before Lewis could leave, well, he came back out with a shotgun. Well, he knew Lewis was there. He came out and stood right over that hedge. And he said, "I know who you are, and I'm going to get you, and when I get you, I'm going to shoot you." And he fired that shotgun in the air about 3 times. Well, Wade and I took off. Well, of course, Lewis was right there under him, about at his feet, and he couldn't go anywhere. And about 2 hours later, well, we were waiting for Lewis, and here came Lewis, and his britches were soaking wet. Bless his heart. He had wet his britches good, at least once. And we thought that was really something. Another thing we did one Halloween night, we had a streetcar, or a bus really. The streetcar used to come to our house, and then they changed to the bus. We decided that we were going to stop the bus and tie tin cans on the back of it. Well, the best way to stop the bus was, you know, for one of us to get out there and see if they'd pick us up. So the bus would stop. Well, the bus came up there, and I was standing out there, and Wade and Lewis were supposed to tie the cans on the back of the bus. The bus stopped, and the bus driver was smarter than I thought he was. He opened the door and wanted to let me in, and I said, "No, sir, I'm just standing here." Well, of course, I probably had a guilty look on my face, so he closed the door and took off, and they didn't get time to put them on. So we decided that what we'd do, we'd go get a big, long rope. And we had a sailboat at the time. And we took the rope off the sailboat, and we tied it to the fire plug right there on that corner, on the north corner there. This is on Buford Street. And then tied the other end of it over to Mr. Darby. He lived across the street from us. He's a real estate man in Corpus. Tied it to the post on his front porch. And that was going to take care of the bus. He'd see that rope across the street, and he'd stop, and then we'd, tie the cans on, and then we'd let the rope down, and he could go. Well, the bus driver didn't see the rope, and he went right through the rope, Well, the fire plug held pretty good. And this was a pretty strong rope. But Mr. Darby's front porch, the post pulled out from under it, and the whole front porch fell. And of course we ran, and Mr. Darby came out and couldn't get out his front door because the front porch had fallen down across the door. Went out the back and came around and found the rope and got my dad. They wanted to know, where we were, and he couldn't find us, and he identified the rope. And we had to work for Mr. Darby, I don't know how long, but we had to help him put his post back up, fix everything back up. And we didn't try that again. I guess it was about that time when we used to pop firecrackers all the time, and we were careful with them. But Buddy Wheelis, who lived behind us, and myself, and that was Brian Taylor or Billy Joe Arnold. Billy Joe's a big Baptist preacher now, a real fine gentleman. But we were told we couldn't pop firecrackers in the front yard anymore, so we decided to sneak around the alley and behind Mr. Blunger's house. He lived about 2 houses down from us, next to the Everharts, and we were always sneaking around his backyard because Mr. Everhart had orange trees, and we liked his oranges. We went out in the back alley, and there again, now, I didn't know anything about gas at the time. Didn't know anything about pipe or gas or drilling wells or any of that stuff then. So we started popping firecrackers back there in the alley where nobody could see us. And Buddy threw a firecracker over to the side of the alley. And when that firecracker went off, the whole alley burst into flames. And everything seemed like it was on fire. There must have been there was a very bad leak in the gas main there that went down the alley. And Mr. Blunger's fence started burning, and the part of his garage started burning, and we might have saved somebody's life. It started a car up later on, because it was a pretty bad leak, but we didn't know it then. All we knew was that everything had caught on fire, and it went up in a boom, and we were scared. We had our eyebrows singed a little bit. I remember my leg got a little singed on it, but I didn't tell anybody about it. We went tearing back and got underneath the bed in our house and stayed there. And the fire department came out, and all the gas people came out, and there again we were peeping out the windows, and they found the firecrackers and checked around, and I don't remember getting a spanking for that, but I think we got scolded pretty good, and might have lied about it. I don't know. I was a pretty good liar about that time. I mean, my mother told me not to pop firecrackers, but she said in the front yard, and she didn't say in the alley. And, you can maneuver around and make it feel like you're doing it where it's legal. But we didn't do that anymore either. I feel like I need to jump back to when I was about 6 weeks old, and tell you about when our house burned. Like I say, I don't remember it. But at the time, my folks had a house on the corner, and then the house where we are now, and then they built a new rent house on the corner. They had some money then, and they were going to rent it. But they moved into the house, and they weren't in it too long. And it was right after, about 2 days or 2 nights after I went swimming in the fish pond down at the courthouse. We had a dog named Bimbo. We've got pictures of Bimbo nursing a litter of kittens. We've got pictures of Bimbo taking care of a chicken. Bimbo was a very unusual Chesapeake Bay. And we've got pictures of him sitting beside us. Like I say, I do not remember Bimbo. But at any rate, the electrical wiring was faulty in that house, and during the night, the house caught on fire. And my folks were asleep. Of course, we were asleep, my brother and I. Clayton was probably about 2.5 or 3 years old. And Bimbo smelt the smoke and tore through the screen door, which was a brand new screen door on the back porch, and jumped up in the middle of my folks' bed and woke them up. And they got me out, but they couldn't find my brother. So my dad wet himself down. Now this is, my dad would never talk about his experiences. And he had some horrible ones. But he weighted him down, is what the Blungers told us, people we stayed with, while we got kind of refixed up with clothes because we lost everything. He wet my dad down, and my dad went back in the house after my brother, and Bimbo went with him. And Bimbo went ahead of him, and when my dad got to the bedroom where we were sleeping, Bimbo was underneath the bed and had hold of my brother's rear end. I don't know if he had diapers on or what, but he was pulling my brother out from under that bed. Probably saved my brother's life. And for that matter, saved all our lives, because it was a wooden frame house, and it went down before the fire engine ever got to do anything that would save it. But Bimbo was quite a dog, and we have the pictures. So when you look at Bimbo's pictures, we'll think about how he saved our lives. It was at this same time that I guess my last year in grade school, or first year in junior high, that my great uncle, we called him Uncle, he was Andy Anderson. He was about 86 at the time. And he got permission from my mother to build us a boat. And she told him he could build us a sailboat if he built one that wouldn't turn over. He built us, it was a well-built boat. It was a 14-foot scow, which is a rectangular-shaped boat. It was 14 feet long and 8 foot wide. Had a gaff-top rigging, quite a bit of sail and a jib, centerboard, and we called it Uncle. That's what we called it, Uncle Andy. We actually ended up, I think, just calling it the Andy. And that was quite a sailboat. We had a lot of fun on that sailboat. We spent all day, every day sailing. And my mother, of course, we had long since learned how to swim, and up at New Braunfels and all over in Junction. So she had no fear of the water with us because we had good water sense. And we were all capable of life-saving. So she didn't worry about us going sailing. So we sailed all over Corpus Bay, and we'd go out to the island where the spoil bank there is right alongside the ship channel, and we put a diving board up out there, and we'd go out and have picnics and take girls out there. Of course, that was before we knew what girls were. We usually took the ones that played like boys then. But we had a lot of fun with that sailboat. We had to rescue it several storms. It got up against the rocks, and we'd have to swim out and pull it in. We'd have to pull it in shore and scrape the barnacles off of it, but that was good education for us to take care of that sailboat and keep it looking pretty. And we thoroughly enjoyed it. Well, now I'm going to tell you about the Craig Street Rattlers. Lewis Davis and Wade and myself and several other boys, about 8 of us, formed a football team, neighborhood football team. We played tackle. We didn't have any pads, but we played tackle. About that time, the YMCA had gotten organized again in Corpus, or reorganized or whatever, and Mr. Ressler was in charge, and the headquarters were down at the Dragon Grill down there. They took the Dragon Grill, which was a nightclub, and downstairs part of it was the YMCA. This is just prior to building the present YMCA. Well, they organized a football league for Corpus. There were about 8 teams, and we were the Craig Street Rattlers. And we played teams from west of town, south of town, North Beach. We played each of them twice, and it ended up, well, we were playing for the championship against a team that I'm not sure where they were, Hillcrest or someplace. That was made up of Billy Rooney and Perkins, a guy named Perkins. They were all track stars at high school later on. But I remember Lewis Davis was the quarterback, and I was the all-star end. And Wade was the center. And we had just a real good ball club. I mean, we executed well. Our form was really terrific. When we caught a pass, we didn't catch it. We caught it. I mean, we had our arms up and our legs spread, and we really had the form better than we did the ability. Well, we stopped playing that championship game. The score got up so high. I think they had us 48-0 when we quit. So we came in second in the league. It was a pretty poor second. And I still have a letter that we got for that. I think it was the first letter I ever got. Probably one of the only ones I ever got. And we thoroughly enjoyed being the Craig Street Rattlers. First year in junior high, it was the second year that Winseal was open, brand new school. I got a bicycle for Christmas. That was a big occasion. And I was so proud of it. I felt like I knew, I knew everything. I knew I was going to get a bicycle. And I was going to sneak a look at that bicycle before Christmas morning. My dad kept telling me, we couldn't afford it. We didn't get you one. Well, I knew I had a bicycle somewhere. And they kept acting like they were putting it out in the garage. And they took the car and closed the garage doors and with the car outside and pulled the car up. Pulled the car up. When I sit out here in this backyard, I try to go to sleep. The car was up against the garage doors. Well, after they went to bed that night, I got up, and I'd never been in a car before, except down on Padre Island. I never steered one before, and down there I ran an old Model T, or Model A, I guess it was. Before my dad could get hold of me, I ran it out in the salt water. But I got the keys out of my dad's pocket, and I went out there, and the car was a 36, I think it was a 36 Oldsmobile. And I got in that car, and I started up, and I had it in forward instead of reverse, and I went right through the garage doors. Well, I jumped up and took the keys out and ran back in the house and threw them on the kitchen table and tried to make it back to bed, but I didn't make it. My dad grabbed me going through the door. Well, I didn't know what in the world I'd done, and I told him somebody had run the car through the garage. I never fooled them. I mean, they always knew me. They could tell when I was lying. Still can. If I'm lying here, they're going to tell me about it later. But at any rate, when we went back out, well, I didn't miss the opportunity to look in the garage. And of course, the bicycle wasn't there, and I went to bed and went to sleep. And the bicycle was in the living room all the time behind the couch, and I found it the next morning. Nearly every summer we went on vacation. And I guess from the time I was 2 or 3, we would either go up to Junction or New Braunfels. Kind of leveled off on New Braunfels. My dad became real close friends with the Warnickes, and Mr. Warnicke had built a tourist court up there, which is pretty popular now. and had drilled holes in the Comal River there in front of his property and dynamited out a channel. And then put up there was an old water wheel there, and put up a dam that caused rapids. And that was probably the first rapids that people ever rode in South Texas. The big thing was getting in inner tubes and riding down them. And of course, the big thing for people that were very good swimmers or good swimmers was to go down without an inner tube, because you had whirlpools at the end of it, and rapids were pretty. When the river was up, the rapids were pretty good. This was before they put the power plant there for San Antonio, so the water was cold and a lot of it. Comal River came out of a spring over at Landa Park, and when it was in its heyday, it was putting out some 300,000 barrels a day. It was the largest spring in the state of Texas, and the Comal River was the shortest, largest river in the state. It ran across town and over to the mill over there and ran into the Guadalupe before it got to the mill. So it wasn't a very long river, but it was a beautiful thing. Clear water. At any rate, we'd go up there every summer, and by the time I was 10 or 11 years old, well, I could maneuver those rapids without any trouble, and thought that I was a very good swimmer. And I guess I was about 10 or 11, and I started noticing girls. And all these girls were sitting up there watching all us big husky boys. I weighed 112, I think, or if I weighed that much. Swimming the rapids. We were diving out of the trees and all that business, but the rapids were such that if you got too close to the dam, well, you were going down the rapids. Well, I'd never been down the rapids yet without an inner tube. And I had never gotten in the whirlpools at the end of the rapid without an inner tube. So these girls were over there, and they were all looking, and there I was showing off, and I yelled back at my mother back there, "Mother, I'm going to swim across to the dam." Well, that took some pretty strong swimming. And I didn't think the girls heard me. My mother heard me, I'm sure, but I didn't think the girls were looking. And so I yelled again, and I wanted to make sure the girls were looking when I took my running jump and dived in and swam across. Well, I did my running jump and dived in and swam across. I got about halfway across, and things just weren't working out. I was losing the battle. I was going the wrong direction. I was swimming one direction, and the current was taking me another direction. The first thing I know was shroop, down the rapids I went, right through the chute. And man, it rocked and rolled me. I hit every rock on the way down, and at the end of it, I ended up in the whirlpool and was struggling and gasping and screaming, and this man picked me up and pulled me out. And I guess that was pretty embarrassing for me, walking past those girls going back. But I guess the way I am, I snuck down there that night. There was no swimming after dark. I went back down there that night, and I practiced by myself. I'd get further back from the rapids and swim across, then I'd come and get about 10 foot closer and swim across, and finally got back to the spot where I was, and by the time I went to bed that night, well, I could swim across those rapids. So the next day I got out there, and I didn't say anything to anybody. I just dived in and swam across. So just to prove it to myself that I could do it. After that, well, of course, we enjoyed New Braunfels for many, many years. Met a lot of good-looking girls up there that were all nice girls, and bad girls always scared me to death. I didn't know what to do with them. But I lifeguarded up there for about 3 summers while I was in high school, and didn't get anything for it except got a free place to sleep. We made many trips up there with the Harvins, and Mr. Harvin would take about 6 or 7 boys, or my dad and mother would take 6 or 7 boys, and we had an awful lot of fun up there, and fond memories of New Braunfels. About that time in my life, I realized that I was about a year younger than everybody else in my class, and I was small. So I decided that I was going to strengthen myself up and become an atlas. I couldn't get on any of the football teams or anything because I was just too little. They kind of laughed at me. I was pretty well coordinated, but I just wasn't big. So this was kind of right after the Depression, and we didn't want for anything, but we didn't just go out and buy what we wanted. I took an old flour sack and filled it up with sand, hung it in the old chinaberry tree. That was my punching bag. And my folks bought me, my big bag, that you hit. Then my folks bought me a little punching bag that I learned a rhythm, about 4 or 5 different rhythms on, and got pretty well adapted to it. And lifted everything in the world, from chinaberry limbs to sacks of chinaberries to old pieces of pipe on a weightlifting program, and got myself built up pretty good by the time I got into high school, but I still was pretty light and couldn't go out for any sports.